Hello everybody. In this video, I'm going to attempt to show you the basics of how to use Blender 2.8 for 2D animation like I did in some of my recent videos. First, you want to go to blender.org and download the latest version of Blender, which is currently version 2.8, although version 2.81 is coming out soon. So yeah, just download, whatever version matches your computer. They have Mac and Linux versions. After you've got Blender download and you crack into it, you're going to see this. So the first thing I'm going to do to get us started is change some of my preferences here in Edit Preferences from the default. So hold on, let me load the default preferences so that it'll look how it will look for you if this is your first time using Blender. So what I want to change is I want to change this to right-click select, because that's how it used to be in older versions of Blender, and I'm much more used to that. But you might want to leave it with a left-click select, because that's kind of how it is in most programs. I'm also going to turn on select all toggles. Again, that's just how it was in earlier versions of Blender. And I'll explain later maybe what select all toggles does. Now that I've got that out of the way, I'm going to hit File, New, and this drop-down will appear. I'm going to click 2D Animation. All this is going to do is it's going to make some of the default windows and the kind of these up here, which are just sort of preset window types, right? You could make any of these setups yourself just by pulling out windows and changing the types, but these are kind of preset to be convenient for 2D animation. So I always do File, New, 2D Animation. And then you'll see we have this big blank canvas. So the first thing I want to show everybody is how to navigate in Blender if you've never done this before. This is just moving in the 3D view. So you use the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and you'll see that this is the canvas. There's this kind of gray area out here. And what's happening is we're currently in the camera view. So we're inside the camera and we're looking forward. And this is just how it default places you when you make a new 2D animation file. But you can click the middle mouse and drag, right click and drag, and you can see what's really going on. So there's the camera, and we're looking forward across the plane. Okay, and now we can't really get back in, right? We're kind of stuck out here. So this is where, and you can zoom in and out, this is where view snapping becomes important, and you can snap to a bunch of different views using your numpad keys. If you don't have a numpad on your keyboard, you want to go into Preferences and let me find this. Okay, Default to Advanced Numeric Input. I believe what that lets you do is use the other number keys above, the letter keys, like the 1, 2, 3, 4. It lets you use those instead, as opposed to the numpad. Basically, all of the numpad numbers let you snap to different parts of the view. So if you press numpad 0, you snap to the camera, and you press it again, and it comes back to wherever you were when you were just moving around. So numpad 0 snaps you to the camera. I should also say that middle mouse click lets you kind of, they call this a trackballing, or like a turntable around a specific point. If you hold Shift and middle mouse click, you can pan like this. So you can zoom, pan, and trackball. And if you're in the camera view, you're going to be using the Shift middle mouse click more, because you want to zoom in without coming out of the camera view. Okay, you can also use numpad 1. That takes you to a front view. It just snaps you to this flat front view. Numpad 3 puts you at a side view. You can see the camera here. Numpad 7 is a top view. And then the other numpads just kind of do other stuff. So numpad 2 kind of lets you scroll in increments like this. And numpad 8 does the opposite. It's like, oh, because it's an arrow. It's got a little arrow on it. Numpad 4 does that. Numpad 6 pans that way. I don't know what numpad 9 does. I've never hit this one. Oh, that's weird. Numpad 5 you might use a bit more often. What this does is it snaps you out of perspective view. So right now we're in perspective view, and if you hit numpad 5, you can see it flattens everything out, so there's no perspective. They call this orthographic perspective. And then if you press 5 again, it snaps you back into perspective. So we're just going to click 0 and go to the camera view for now. Okay, next I would like to talk about layers. So over here, you have this sidebar with all these icons on it, and these are different menus you can access. This green one with the squiggly line, at least that's how it looks in 2.8. They might change that later, but this is the layers menu. And you can see up here it says layers. This is the name of the object that we're currently inside of. We're inside of a stroke or grease pencil object. And you can see here this grease pencil object has 2 layers, one called lines and one called fills. And both layers, you can select them, have these little buttons next to them. So this little lock button does what it kind of does in most 2D art programs, which is it makes it so you can't edit that layer. In case you're like editing all the layers at once, you might want to lock some of them so you can lock them. The little eyeball here lets you make them visible and invisible. There's nothing on these layers right now, so that's not, you can't really see what's happening. And then this last one is onion skinning. And if you've ever used an animation program before, you know what onion skinning is. But if you haven't, onion skinning is it shows you ghost images of the frames before and after the one you're working on. So it's kind of like a light table. You can reference, what the next drawings are and what the previous drawings are. It's really a must if you're doing in-betweens. Oh, and this first one is a little harder to explain. Okay, mask layer removes any pixel outside underlying layers drawing. That explains it pretty well, actually. So if you have a drawing of a circle on this layer, and then you've got some like squiggles on this layer, you can click this, and it'll lock the alpha channel of the squiggles to the layer directly below it. This comes in handy in very specific situations. But let's move on. This is the blend mode. You'll recognize this from 2D art programs, right? You got overlay, add, subtract. Subtract does something different in Blender. I'd have to show you. I never really used it, so I won't go into it for now. But multiply does what you think it do, and a divide does what you think it do. Below that, we have the opacity. I should put something on this layer. Let me just quickly there. So now you can change the opacity, right? And it does exactly, that. And it's got this little button here. This is the same as this button. It's just in a different spot. It's the mask button. Let's actually show that in action. So let's say down here, I'm going to draw a circle. Whoops. Okay, escape, right? When I was drawing the circle, it hasn't actually drawn it. You have to click enter to officially draw it, or you could click escape. I'm just going to Control Z undo that because I want to make it kind of solid. So I'm going to use a solid color, hit enter. I'll talk about the colors in a second, but now you can see if I click over to lines and I turn on the mask, you see exactly what it does. It chops it off using the layer beneath it. And if you flip these, you could see the opposite effect, right? Okay, I'm going to talk about materials now, but before I do, I'd like to point out that this layer menu is also kind of accessible up here. So it says layer, and it's just like a simplified version of it where you can change the opacity, you can turn on onion skinning. And this is just if you've got the materials tab open or any other tab open and you don't want to click over here and go through all that work. You can just click up here and you've got a little quick menu. Let's talk about the materials now. So in Blender, these are different from other Blender materials. These are like grease pencil specific types of materials, and they consist of a stroke and a fill. So you can see with this one, it's just called black, and it's like a black line. And the stroke is on, but the fill is turned off. So if I turn the fill on, it's going to kind of turn into a mess. Let me demo that a little so you can see it, bro. What is it doing, right? It's kind of automatically filling in what it thinks is the middle of the thing you're drawing, basically. I don't really use the fill tool I don't use fills like this. I just kind of draw the lines, with a line color like this. And then I use the fill bucket and I fill it in with a fill color later. So yeah, you've got red, and you can see that's just, it's the same as black, but it's red. You've got gray, which is, the stroke is gray, and the fill is the same shade of gray. And then you've got black dots, and this apparently makes little dots. I've never used this, it's very strange. But let's talk about how to make your own materials, because this is basically your palette, right? I like to have each character in the animation, kind of each character in each shot, be their own grease pencil object. And each grease pencil object, this one again is just called stroke, has its own materials. And you can have multiple strokes use the same materials, but the specific list of materials that they're using, the palette, is different for each stroke. But again, they can use the same materials, so you can have, you know, like this gray will be the same gray anytime you use it, as long as you're picking this specific one. You could even change the name. This is like my gray. So yeah, let's make another color. Let's make a blue color. So I'm just gonna click on my gray, and you can see it's using another instance of this material. It's using a second instance of it. And you can see there's a 2 here, because that's telling you that there are 2 instances of this same material. And if you change anything about it, it'll change for both of them, because you're changing the base material, and it doesn't matter who's using it, you know, it'll always change. So let's change that back. So if you want to make this a unique material that has nothing to do with this gray one, you just click the 2, and that will make it unique. And now we can change it to blue. And now that it's unlinked from the gray, we can also change this part. So let's change this to a bluish color. And you want the stroke to be the same as the fill. And the easiest way to do that, you could click it here and try and like, you know, color drop it. But what's way easier is you just hover over the color here, and you do Control-C to copy, and then Control-V to paste. And now they're the same. And you want them to be the same when you're filling stuff, so that the very edges of your fill, the stroke at the edge of the fill, is the same color, so it doesn't look weird. Unless you want it to, you know, maybe you're trying to do some specific look. Moving on, let's start talking about the tools over here. Okay, so let's erase this kind of mess I've made. What's the easiest way to do that? So here's the tools. This is the draw tool, right? This is the one you'll be using when you're doing sketching or line art or that kind of stuff. And right now, you can see it's set to draw pencil. These are all just presets, and you can program your own and add them in here. But these are the ones that come with Blender. So I use draw pencil if I'm doing like sketching. I'll usually use like a bluish color. Let's change that name. Sketch. And you can, you know, draw with it. So I drew this blue sketchiness on the fills layer, and you can see that because it made a little dot, it made a keyframe here. Oops. It made a keyframe here, and it only appeared on the fills layer, which, well, also I have fills selected when I was drawing. So let's undo that and make sure that we're drawing it on lines. Right, and now it's appearing on the lines layer because that one's selected. Okay, let's do some line art. So I'm going to change brushes to draw noise. This is the brush I use. I just use a default brush in my animation so far. Maybe I'll change that. And you can see this is the material it's drawing with. This is again a kind of shortcut menu where you can quickly access all your materials for this grease pencil object, and you can, you know, click through them. This is the radius of the brush, the size, right? Let's make that smaller. This lets you turn on pressure sensitivity if you're using a tablet. This is the strength of the brush. You can kind of guess what that does. It's about like opacity. And again, you could link that to the pressure sensitivity. This is the same as that other menu over here. It's just it's a preset list, and you could add your own presets and stuff. These are the options. It's kind of complicated, but you can see like post-processing, this is smoothing out the strokes after you draw them. And you can make it smoother by increasing the level of smoothness. You can kind of experiment around with these to get something you like. And because this is the draw noise brush, hold on, it has randomize on. So you'll see what it does is it adds random thickness to the stroke as you're drawing it. And I really like this because it's a very quick and dirty way to get some texture on your brush. It's not real texture, of course, right? It's just randomly changing the size, but it kind of looks textured. And I like that. It's comforting when I'm drawing to have that little bit of grit. These are I don't think it's going to look like this for you. I think I changed that. So it should look like this by default. This is, again, it's in other 2D art programs, but it's how hard you click with the pressure sensitivity and what kind of graph that pressure is associated with. So if you did this, then you wouldn't have to press as hard to get stronger, thicker strokes. Right. Display, that's just like the icon for the picture. That's if you want to make your own custom brushes. Okay. So I'm just going to draw a circle, or, not draw a circle. And again, you have to hit enter, right? So this menu appears and you can rescale it and even move it around. Whoop, can you move it around? Maybe you can't move it around. I don't know what that red dot means. But you have to hit enter for it to kind of draw it onto the screen. And it's the same for all these other ones. Square. Oh, this is like if you wanted to do, like a Bezier curve, that kind of thing. You have to enter. Well, I'm just going to put a circle here, and then we're going to talk about the fill tool. So I'm going to fill this circle in with the color blue. Let's just see what happens. Okay, so you'll see it's gone outside of our lines, right? And that's because it's on the same layer. So it just draws it on top because it's on the same layer. So it's wise to separate out your line art layer from your fill layer, and Blender encourages you to do this. So let's click over to our fill layer. So now that's selected, and anything we draw will appear on that one. And now let's fill. And you can see it filled it underneath the line art. So that's great. It looks like it's bleeding over the edge a little bit, and the reason it's doing that is the settings up here. So the thickness, that's the thickness of the edge of your fill. So if we make that thinner, you can see that looks way better. This is the leak size. You can kind of, if you've used other art programs, you know what that is. Let me do an example, but like, I didn't quite fill it. And then we go to the oops, I just drew that little line on the fill. I have to make sure I draw it on the lines. Oh, okay, I'm making a mess. Let's draw it here. Oop, there we go. I'm using my mouse because I don't want to go over to the tablet right now. I might do that later in the video. So now let's try and fill it in. Make sure we have the fill layer selected. And you'll see it just filled the whole screen. Well, here's one thing about Blender. It didn't fill the whole screen because if you zoom out, you'll see it only filled up to the edge of how zoomed in you were, which is a very strange but interesting feature, right? Like if I fill here, it didn't even fill the whole shape because it only fills to the edge. So when you're filling stuff, you want to make sure the whole thing you're trying to fill is within your view, or it's going to cut it off a little. But you can see it can't fill this because the hole is too big. So what you can do is you could increase the leak size more. Uh-oh. Okay, I think I've done something wrong. I think I might have put this on the wrong layer. Let's try again. Make sure that this is on the line layer. Oh my goodness. Messing everything up. Okay, it's on the line layer, and we're gonna draw it, and it's like almost close but not quite. Then we go back to the fills layer and we try to fill it. There we go, that's perfect. I must have messed the other one up. Okay, so the leak size is 14, you can see it filled it. So let's try a smaller one, maybe 5? That's too small. 7, I don't know. I don't know at what point. 12? I guess that's a pretty big hole. Try to just avoid having big holes in your lineup, but it's going to happen anyway, and here's some tricks to avoid it. So let's make this smaller. I usually have the leak size at like 1 because, well, let me show you why I would do that. If you draw something like this, something with little spikes, and then you try to fill that, but you've got a high, a big leak size like 8 or something, it's not going to fill it to the tips of the thing you've drawn. So if you have like hair or something, It's really annoying. So I try to keep the leak size very low. And you can see it filled that in. But it didn't fill this in. So what's a quick way of fixing that? One quick way, well, this is a super quick way. You could just zoom out, which sounds kind of silly, but this is the way Blender does fills, is as you, the further away you get, the less detail it thinks of the shape. So if you zoom out enough and fill, hold on, that might be too, oh, no, it worked. Okay, so I zoomed out a ton, and I filled, and you can see it did a really bad job because I was so zoomed out, and it kind of simplified its idea of this shape so much. And as you zoom in, it gets more detailed. So that technique works a lot better when your hole isn't so big, when the gap isn't so big. When it's just like a little gap, then you can just kind of zoom out a bit, you know, fill it, and then zoom back in. And that works great for some situations. But if the gap is really big, one thing you can do is if you hold Alt and then left click draw, you can draw this kind of fill catcher line, and it always appears in the color that you're going to fill with. But you hold Alt, you draw the line in, and then you fill, and you can see it caught the fill at that spot. This is great. This is great again for kind of bigger gaps, or if you have, let me do another demo. If you've got like anime style eyes like this, you know, and you want the you don't want to draw lines here, right? So you want to draw the lines on the fill because you don't want line art there. So that's where Alt comes in handy. You could use Alt to do that, and then it would encapsulate the shape. Next is the eraser tool. You can kind of guess how this one works, but you know, you can change the radius, you can change the strength. Actually, don't know what this is. Effect stroke strength. Not sure what that is, but I just usually just switch to a different preset. So this is eraser soft, and you can see it. It kind of, you know, softly erases stuff. Or you could do eraser point. Or you could do eraser point, and that just kind of, you know, that one's very aggressive. It just kind of clips stuff away. Or eraser hard. Okay, that's kind of like eraser soft, but it's harder. I usually use eraser point because I don't when I'm altering my line art, I don't want this kind of soft look. I just want to get rid of stuff. I guess it depends on what style you're going for though. This is the cutter tool. I'll be honest, I don't really know what this is. Whoa, I guess it's like an eraser, but okay, it's like an eraser, but you can cut specific parts out. That's kind of cool. Maybe I'll use that at some point. This one at the top sets the 3D cursor, which is a big thing in Blender. The 3D cursor is just like a part of the program. But you can't see the 3D cursor in this drawing view, so it doesn't really matter. I wonder if we can turn that on. Here's some options up here. You want this one, overlays, and you want to click this down arrow. And let's see. So these are the different kind of helpful overlays that are turned on right now. We've got the grid floor, which you can see here, right? And I can turn that off. And you can change the scale and the subdivisions. Text info, that must be info about stuff. 3D cursor, there we go. So we could turn that on if we want it, and now we can see it. I don't think that's really necessary. It's turned off for a reason in this mode because you don't really need it. And there's a bunch of other stuff. Oh, and onion skin. That's like the onion skinning in general, right? Each layer and each material has its own onion skin on or off option, but you could also just turn the whole thing on or off. And these are pretty self-explanatory. You know, they're just box and circle tools. And again, you have to press escape if you don't want to draw it, right? Escape. And you have to press enter if you do want to draw it. There you go. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about in this little session, I'll probably record another session tomorrow, but the last thing I want to talk about now is the timeline. Okay, so you can see this summary tells you what grease pencil objects exist in your scene. So right now we only have a stroke, And inside of that stroke, and you can drop that down, it has two layers, lines and fills. And you could hide these or press this arrow. I don't know what that does. The checkbox, I mean, not an arrow. I don't know what that does. Or you could lock them. But you can see these little dots here. These they're like diamonds. These are keyframes. So at the top here is the summary keyframe that just tells you, this lets you control all the keyframes on every layer in every object at that point in time. But if you want to control the individual layer keyframes, you can do that here. Right, so there's two keyframes for lines and fills. If you want to make a new keyframe, we could go a couple frames later, and you skip through frames with the arrow keys, right? So arrow key right and arrow key left. Right, so let's go a couple frames later and let's make a new keyframe. So the easiest way to make a new keyframe, and let's do it on the line art layer, so make sure that's selected. The easiest way to make a new keyframe is just to start drawing, right? So we're on this frame number 8, and we start drawing, and it automatically makes a new keyframe. And you can see this green ghost image of what was on the frame before. And when we go a frame back, you can see a blue ghost image of what's on the next keyframe, right? And that's the onion skinning. So that's the easiest way. You just start drawing and it makes a new keyframe. And it'll do this no matter what. It's a little bit annoying, but it's helpful sometimes, so I guess it's like a trade-off. Another way to make a new keyframe is you could go strokes, animation, insert blank frame. And the hotkey for this is DB, which is really weird because it's not like Control B or something. It's you hold the key D and then you hold the key, press the key B. So DB. You hold D and press B. Right, so DB. And that makes just a blank keyframe. I use that hotkey quite a bit if I'm I want to just blank frame, and now I've got blank frames. And it nudged the other keyframes forward. It doesn't always do that, but because I was sitting right on top of it, it nudged them forward. Let's talk about how to duplicate keyframes, or how to move keyframes in general. So you can see these keyframes down here, and you can select them, right? And you press G to grab. Now G is used throughout Blender to move basically anything. It's just how you grab stuff. So you'll want to get used to this. G, and then you can move it around, right? And if you click, then it sets it in place, and if you do the other click, then it kind of forgets it, or it cancels the operation. I think you could use escape too. Yeah, you could use escape. You could use enter or escape as well. So you can see you can move it around like this, and if you want to duplicate it, you do shift, you hold shift and then press D. So shift D, and then you move, and you can see it floats around, and then you click to set it. And you can shift select multiple frames, and you can shift D. So you can duplicate a whole sequence of frames. You can do this across layers. This isn't going to look like anything because it's all the same keyframe. Should have had. I shouldn't just do that offhandedly. So I hit B. I hit B and it does box select, right? So it if you know how box select works. You drag and then you do that, and then you delete the keyframes with X. X delete keyframes. Let me make another keyframe so you can get a better idea of what's going on. So let's do. This is if they've moved through space or something. Right, so now you got, two different frames. And now I could shift D, duplicate them, and you can see it flips back and forth between them. And you could even like, just multiply it. Right, just do it a bunch of times. And to play the animation, you hit spacebar. So, what a fantastic animation. Or you could press this button here to play the animation, this button to play the animation, I presume backward? Oh, okay, that's weird. Cancel. Escape. Press escape to, you hit space to play and then space again to pause, or you could hit space and then escape, and it goes, it puts the cursor back where it started. This is to jump to next keyframe. This is to jump to endpoint. One thing I'll say is arrow key up and down are very useful to jump between keyframes like this. But if you have a different layer selected and you try to jump between keyframes, it can only jump to the ones on that layer, which I find kind of annoying. And it took me a while to find this, but if you go into this panel here, keying, that's incorrect. Whoops. If you go into, oh my gosh. Okay, I found it. So you click view and you deselect only keyframes from selected channels. It's a very self-explanatory name, but it took me a second to find it. There. You click that, and now you do arrow keys up and down, and it lets you jump between keyframes on all your layers. This is really helpful. I think you should have this. This should almost be turned on by default. I mean, I know why it's not turned on by default, because it might be kind of weird for people, but trust me, you'll want this on later, because if you've got like, if you've drawn, line art across all these keyframes of what the character's doing, and you want to fill in that line art, you don't want to go around and click and like go, okay, there's the frame, and I'm on the filled layer, fill. Okay, there's the next frame. Oh, I clicked wrong. There it is. Fill. You just want to do arrow key up and down. It's so much easier, and then you just jump from the keyframes. Boop, 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 boop. It's perfect. One other thing I'll show you about this timeline menu is this button here, active only. This is another thing I kind of turn on by default. So you can't see what it's doing right now, but if you had multiple grease pencil objects in your scene, which I do, I have like tons of them, then this summary would show you the keyframes for every grease pencil object in your scene, and it just gets so messy. And there's, like dozens of these, and you have to find the one you're looking for. It's so annoying. So if you turn on active only, then only the object, the grease pencil that we're drawing inside of, only its keyframes show up, and it just simplifies things so much. Okay, I think that's it for the basics. And we're back. Okay, I'm gonna keep explaining the slightly more intermediate levels of the grease pencil in Blender 2.8. So first, let's make a little example thing. I'm gonna take the color black. I'm gonna draw the lines layer, and I'm gonna draw some shape. Okay, and what I'm going to talk about now is edit mode. So right now, if we go up here, we're in draw mode. You can see there's object mode, edit mode, sculpt mode, draw mode, and weight paint. I usually only use draw mode, edit mode, and of course object mode. Object mode is like the default mode pretty much in Blender. You can access anything in object mode, and then you can go into that object's individual modes, which is why it's at the top. So we're going to go into edit mode. Now you can just click it here. Another way to go into edit mode is to hit the tab key. So if we hit tab now, it'll take us to object mode. If you hit tab again, it takes us to edit mode. So another quick way to navigate through these modes is to do control tab. Control tab. I guess you have to hold it down, and it makes a little pie, right? And then you can jump around. So I just do the pie draw mode. So we're in draw mode, but we want to be in edit mode. So control tab, edit mode. Okay, now we're inside edit mode for this grease pencil stroke. And if we zoom in, you can't really tell, but you can select the individual points that make up this stroke, because it's like a vector, right? It's like vector art. And this kind of nasty thing happens. Oh, so I'm selecting I'm using right click select. You would use left click to select the dot, and then I hit G to move it, right? And so for me, if I left click select, it places it, and if I right click select, it drops it where you left it, kind of undoes it. I think that's opposite if you're using left click select. I'm making this too complicated. You can select multiple dots. There's a couple ways. One way I use a lot is you hit the C key for circle select, and it makes a little circle, and you can make the circle bigger and smaller with the middle mouse scroll, and then you just select them like this, and then you right click to cancel out. So you left click to select all the dots, right click to cancel out, and now you've got all these dots and you can move them around. Or here's some other operations. You could hit the S key for scale, G for grab, S for scale. And now you can scale them. R for rotate, so G, S, R. Those are the three most common ways to move anything in Blender, is grab, scale, and rotate. I believe you can move those, yes, with these tools over here. So, and there it tells you the shortcut is G. But you can press that, and this gives you this kind of thing, where you can move it on these specific axes. And if you click in the center, left click in the center, you can move the whole thing. Or you have the rotate one, same thing, scale one. This lets you do it on specific axes, right? You could do only on the x-axis. Now, the way to do that with hotkeys is if you hit S to scale, then you can then press X, Y, that's not really doing much, or Z, right? And if you press Z again, okay, it cancels out of it. Or I think you have to press it twice, but X, X, X. There you go. You have to press it a couple times, and then it cancels out. But and that you can do that with grab as well. So G, X, Z, right? Y. Y is not doing any. Well, okay, you can kind of see what it's doing. It's kind of woo. So anytime you're moving an object or rotating it or scaling it, you can hold down Shift, and that makes it way more granular. It slows it down, so you can be way more precise, right? So you're moving it, and right now it's tracking to your mouse exactly, but you hold down Shift and it slows it down. This is really helpful if you're trying to move things very exactly, and works for scale as well, and rotate. Okay, so I don't typically edit points like this, like, just moving them around, because it kind of, there's not enough detail for that to work. Oh, while I'm talking about grabbing, moving, and rotating, I need to talk about proportional editing, because that's another huge thing in Blender. So you to turn on proportional editing, you click O. Not sure why that makes sense. O for the shape of the proportional editor kind of looks like an O. You see it turned it on up here. So you could also just click up here, but proportional editing. And then next to it is the shape of the fall off of the proportional editing. So now when I try and move an object, you'll see it makes this big circle, and it moves it proportionally, where the thing that at the center of the circle, the thing you selected moves the most, and then the stuff at the edges moves less and less and less, according to this curve up here, right? According to this curve. So you could use a different curve, and it would the proportional fall off would be different. But this is this is nice, so it doesn't just turn it off and move it. That's no good. So proportional editing is really helpful if you want to kind of tweak some shapes and move them around. Okay, and then and it works for scale as well as rotate, and you get like, whoa. Okay, so I'm gonna turn that off. So let's say we've selected these, right, and we've moved them around or something, and now we want to deselect them. So to deselect stuff in Blender, you want to do Alt-A. Now, and then you can click A to select all, Alt-A to deselect all. Now, this is actually something I changed in my preferences. So that's how it's going to work for you, but I changed it earlier. Where is that? Here. I turned on select all toggles. So in old Blender, Alt-A wasn't a thing, and if you wanted to deselect everything, you just press A again. So it's like on, off, it's a toggle. But that could be confusing at times if you've got like two things selected and you press A, it deselects them, but sometimes you want to select everything, so you press A and it's like, oh, it deselected it, press A again, there we go. And it can be confusing. So they changed it, so now it's A to select all, Alt-A to deselect all, unless, again, you turn on select all toggles. Then it goes back to the old way, which is A, on and off. I prefer it on and off, just because that's how I'm used to using Blender. Okay, let's talk about, this is one of the most common uses for edit mode in Grease Pencil, is moving shapes between layers. So let's go back to draw mode, and let's say I've drawn a kind of mouth shape here. Right, and I put the mouth on this layer, but let's go over here. I don't know if I showed this before. It's a little self-explanatory, but I should have shown it, which is you hit the plus to make a new layer. You'd hit the minus to get rid of a layer. I don't know what this drop-down does. Ooh, duplicate layer. Okay, that's cool. Oh, merge down. I didn't know we could do that. That's really cool. But I just want to make a new layer. We're going to call it mouth. And I want to move this shape onto the mouth layer because right now it's just on the line. So what we do is we go into edit mode. Whoops. Control tab, edit mode. We select this. Let me show you a really cool way of selecting. Just select some of the points on all the shapes like this, and then click L. L is select everything that's linked to those these vertices, which is that's what these little dots are called. So you hit L, and it selects all the linked vertices up to the edges, and that's a really quick way of selecting like whole shapes. So now we have all those shapes, and we want to move it to the mouth layer. So you hit M for move. I feel like I'm using a lot of hotkeys. Blender doesn't necessarily rely on hotkeys now. They have menus to do this stuff. Like I bet you could move in here somewhere. Yeah, move to layer, right? And you can move it to another layer. And it tells you the hotkey there. I'm just used to hotkeys. I really like the hotkeys. So M to move onto the mouth layer. Ta-da. And now, if we go into draw mode, I mean, you could do this in edit mode too, but now we can hide it. And you'll see it's on the mouth layer. Yay. Oh, edit mode is also an easy way to delete lines, right? Maybe you want to use the eraser, but maybe it's not precise enough. So if you really just want to get super precise, you can just select this line, hit L to select the whole line, and then X. Oh, and it gives you options on what do you want to delete. Do you want to delete all the points? Do you want to delete all the strokes you have selected? Do you want to delete the frame you have selected? I would just want to do points, right? And then it's gone. We can do that here as well. And that's a very precise way of getting rid of some of your lines. Ooh, the sun. I guess I'll briefly demo sculpt mode in Grease Pencil. I don't use this ever. I'm sure some people will find it helpful, but I just prefer to do the drawing again. This is for tweaking your drawing. So it's kind of like proportional editing. You see I have this tool selected. This is the push tool. This is the grab tool. I bet it grabs stuff. Yep, certainly does. Thickness, maybe you can like paint it thicker. I don't know. If you're a certain type of artist, what is this? Smooth. Maybe this will be helpful for you. I just don't really use it, but randomize. Ooh, that's cool. Ooh. Now I think you can make this brush bigger. So a hotkey in Blender, if you have any sort of brush that you want to make bigger, click F, and then you have this option. I think this is similar to a lot of other art programs. You hit F, and then you can make it bigger. Or if you're using like a Cintiq or a graphic tablet that has like one of those sliders on it. I don't know how to explain it if you've never used one, but they have these little like sliders that you can associate with the size of any brush, and Blender follows those rules too, which is nice. It's programmed good. Twist. I don't know why you'd want this. Whoa! Okay, that's enough sculpt mode. I don't. Let's go into object mode. So again, object mode is like the overworld. All the other modes exist inside of objects. So when you're in edit mode, you're in edit mode for that object. When you're in sculpt mode, you're in sculpt mode for that object. But when you're in object mode, you exist in the whole overworld. This is where you can select objects. So you can select the whole stroke, and you can move it around. And you can see this little orange dot. That's the origin or center of the of your stroke. And that really just changes, like when you scale it, it scales from the origin. So if we went into edit mode, selected everything and moved it over there, and then scaled it, you would see it scales from the origin, and it rotates from the origin. And again, I'm clicking S to scale, G to grab, R to rotate. I should turn on the thing where it like tells you what keys I'm pressing. I couldn't find it, so I'm just gonna keep calling out what keys I'm pressing as best I can. So I'm going to tab into edit mode. I'm going to G to grab, move these back, because that's annoying me. So now it's over there, and we can G to grab, R to rotate, S to scale. I'm going to keep saying this over and over. S, X, but we're in object mode, so now we can add more objects. So let's add another stroke. So Shift A is to add objects, or you can go up here, add, right? But Shift A gives you that same menu. So you could add a mesh, like a plane, a cube. Let's add a cube because it's funny. It's a cube. And if we want to rotate the cube, you could hit R, but that would rotate it around. The axis kind of defaults to where the camera's facing at it. So a great way to rotate objects more naturalistically is you tap R twice, and this gives it this trackball effect. I love this, and you can like hold shift to get more precise, but now you can just kind of move stuff. You could do this too the grease pencil too. Tap R twice and you get the trackball. You don't need to like double tap it. You could press R and then press R again. You know, I just like to access it quickly, so I just tap it. We don't need a cube right now. X, delete. But yeah, if you want to add another grease pencil stroke, you could do Shift A, grease pencil, stroke, blank, or monkey. Now a blank is just a stroke, but it doesn't have any information in it. I'll show you what it looks like. So here's a stroke, and it gives you this default, gives you 2 default layers, a bunch of default materials, and it adds this very simple stroke. And if you wanted to draw in here, you would do Control Tab, Draw Mode, and you would, you know, change this to the harder one. And you just, you know, get rid of it, and then you could start drawing whatever you wanted. Control Tab, oops, Control Tab, Object Mode. So now we're in Object Mode. So now you've got these 2 different strokes. And you can move them around and stuff. But if you add a blank stroke, it's just gonna add a little dot, and you have to Control Tab into Draw Mode, and you'll see it has no layers and 1 material, just black. So if you just start drawing, I think it'll add a layer by default. It didn't. It's interesting. Whoop. Oh, it sort of did, but in a laggy, weird way. That was odd. It's better to just, you know, just add a layer. Whoops. Draw, new layer. There you go. And the other one, back to object mode, is Shift A, grease pencil, monkey. So this is Suzanne, who is kind of an iconic character in the history of Blender. Usually Suzanne looks like this. Shift A, mesh, monkey. This is the Suzanne most people are used to. It's this 3D model of this monkey head. But they added this, X, delete. They added this 2D version of Suzanne in honor of the grease pencil. And you can kind of glean some of how these objects work from this. You can see there's the lines and the fill. And 2 layers, one for the lines, one for the fills. X, delete, okay. Now I want to talk about how to animate these objects. If you have a character doing an action, you want to move the whole character through space, right? You want to take the whole grease pencil object and animate it moving. Let me show you how to do that. So we'll take this one, and we're going to animate it moving. So first we need to create a keyframe. So you press I, and you can see you have this keyframe menu, and it's basically asking you, what do you want me to create a keyframe of? So I'm very used to lock, rot, scale. That's how I always call it that growing up, lock, rot, scale. This is just a keyframe for its location, its rotation, its scale. It covers all your bases. So lock, rot, scale. And you can see it turned all these yellow. So this is the location, the Y, the Y position and the Z position. And it turns them yellow because a keyframe has been created, right? And now anytime you move to the next frame or move to any frame, I click over here to move to a different frame, it's going to snap back to whatever the keyframe was. So, oh, if you ever want to just jump back to the first frame at any point, you do Shift back arrow or Shift left arrow, right? And then Shift right arrow takes you to the end frame. So you can go back and forth. Okay, so we create a keyframe here and we want to go a couple frames ahead. Let's go 20 frames ahead. Then we want to like have it do something, so let's move it to here, and then I, lock, rot, scale. And so if we go back to the beginning and we hit spacebar to play, ta-da! You can see it moves through space. And it's moving linearly, which just means, you know, it just goes, it has no slow in, slow out. What's the other word for that? Easing. It has no easing. That's the word I'm thinking of. So if you want it to ease, like you want it to, instead of just moving linearly, you want it to ease in and out. A really quick way to do that is to change its graph, the graph of its movement. So if you want to access the graph editor, I'm going to minimize this menu with T. Oops. T minimizes this one. I want N. I think you can minimize it by pressing one of these. I'm very used to the hotkeys. I'm sorry about that. So N, for some reason, is the menu on the right, and T is the toolbar. That one makes sense. So I'm just going to minimize that so I can access this easier. Up in the top corner of any window in Blender, you can see this is a window, this is a window, this is the big empty, big 3D view window. Up in the top corner, your cursor turns into a little crosshair, and you can click and drag. I'm going to drag to the left, and that splits the view. So now we have two windows, and they're both two different 3D views. So I want to change one of them to be the graph editor, and you change what a window is up here in the top corner with this drop down, right in the top left. Right now it says this is a 3D viewport. You can see this one is properties. So if you click this, you can see all the different editor types. So I could even change this to be another 3D view if I wanted. 3D viewport, right? Oh, it gave us a weird angle, but there, now we're back in the 3D viewport. This one's all gray just because this is the default settings for the 3D viewport. These settings have been changed by Blender, and you can change them yourself up here, I think. Yeah, I think it's in here. But it's been changed for 2D animation because, they want like a white canvas or whatever, so it feels more animatory. But this is how it looks by default in Blender. It's all gray, and you've got these axes lines, right? Green is the y-axis, red is the x-axis. Anyway, let's change this back. Properties. And we want to change this one to the graph editor under animation. And now you can see it's going to show the graphs for the object you have selected. So if you select this one, it won't show anything. But this one has these graphs. And we can see, because I moved the object on the x-axis and the y-axis? Yeah, blue is y-axis. No, z-axis. Blue is the z-axis. Green is the y-axis. So you could also see this here under this drop-down. You can see the x location changed, right? I could hide that. And the y location changed. So, and you can also see that it's a linear curve. This is getting kind of advanced, but it's not that hard to change this. So you just hit A to select all, and you want to change the interpolation of these curves, right? Right now they're linear. You want it to have some easing. So you hit T, and you can set keyframe interpolations for the keyframes you have selected. So I have them all selected, and I want to change them to Bezier. Look at that. So now you can see it's going to start slow, it's going to pick up speed, and it's going to slow down. And you can see that here. It's not very drastic, but we can make it more drastic. Oh, this is me holding Control and middle mouse click and drag. And that lets you kind of scale this window like this. This is only something you can do in these 2D windows. Like, you can't really do that here. It just zooms you in and out if you do that. But here you can kind of flatten it and stretch it out so you can see the curves better. So you might be wondering, how do I make this ease more extreme? Is you just want to select, let's hit normalize. This is getting way too complicated. Normalize just takes all the curves in it. It kind of flattens them out so the top is the same top for all of them. And this lets you do this. That was B to box select. Click and drag, and you can select all these points. Then you want to scale them. Oops. But you want to scale them on the x-axis. So S, X. There we go. And we'll just make them way bigger. And then we'll do the same over here. S, X. And now you can see it's more eased. Can we do a more extreme one? Let's keep scaling it. Real ease. Now, if this object is moving in a bunch of different ways, like maybe it's rotating too, and you don't want to edit all of the, you don't want to mess with the keyframes of a different axis of like its rotation, you can just lock those. So let's say we want to lock everything but its X, Y, and Z location, right? So those are all locked. And now when you edit, you can only edit those ones. So that's helpful if an object is moving in a bunch of different ways. So let's say this is done. Let's say this is what we wanted. If we want to close this window, what you can do is you can, oh, it's really finicky. It's easier to do it up here. Just hover in the top right corner, it turns back in a crosshair, and then click and drag into it. And this big arrow appears, and when you release, it swallows it up. Let's talk about how to add an image into Blender. So let's say maybe you've animated your characters as these grease pencil strokes, but you want to do the background outside Blender in like an art program, and you just want to draw it and save it as a PNG and pull it into Blender. So the way you do this, I think you need to go into your preferences first and make sure you have this add-on installed. It might be installed by default. I hope it is. But we're just going to check anyway. So it's called Images as Planes. I'll just search for images. And it lets you import images as planes. So right now it's turned on. Hopefully it's turned on for you. If it's not, make sure to turn it on. And then when you do Shift A, you can come down here to Image. And you see Reference, Background, Images as Planes. So let's click Images as Planes. And you see it's got like a file directory here. And you can't see any of the images, but you can change the way it looks at it up here. I believe it's this one. There we go. And you can see I'm inside my Witches on Tinder animation. So let's grab one of these backgrounds, maybe this one, right? And we want to change some of the settings down here. The only one I want to change is shadeless. So diffuse just means it's going to have the text. It's just going to be a plane with the exact dimensions and texture of this background image. But if it's diffused, then it will like be affected by lighting and stuff. And I don't want that. I just want it shadeless. So there's no lighting. It's just completely flat colors. Okay. Import images as planes. Look, there it is. That's awesome. So let's scale it up and make it bigger. Right now it's kind of in front of the grease pencil stroke, or it's sort of inside of them. So let's hit G to grab, Y to move it on the Y-axis. I'm going to hold Shift to be nice and granular and just move it behind them a little. And you can see it's behind them. Maybe we'll scale it up a bit more. There we go. So now we've got this cool background and the strokes animate on top of it. Yay! And you could animate the background in the same way, right? I to make a keyframe, and you could move it around and stuff. You could even animate the whole camera. I do this quite a bit, right? You could make a keyframe for the camera. You could go a couple frames forward. Oh, let me show you this. When you're in the camera view, again, you want to hit numpad 0 to go to the camera view. You can actually have the camera selected and hit G. And then you can move the camera on like this. But let's say you want to zoom in. So the way you can zoom in, what you're doing is you want to move the camera forward on its looking axis. And the way to do that, the kind of trick hockey for that is you middle mouse click once. And now you can see as we move the mouse around, we zoom in and out. So let's zoom in. Create a keyframe. And if we go to the outside world, you can see the camera moving. Shift left arrow to go to the first frame. There you go, the camera kind of moves in. And if we're in the camera view, we zoom in. One thing I'll talk about really quick is how we're rendering this in the viewport. So right now we're rendering this as the viewport shading is set to look dev, and you can change that up here. So if we could set it to solid. And now it won't show the textures of objects anymore. So this is what this plane looks like by default. It's just kind of gray. We could do wireframe, and now you can see through stuff. This works better if we have a mesh. Right, you can see the wireframe of the mesh. So solid, you could do, again, look dev, which gives you, look dev lets you see textures and stuff, but it doesn't give you like shading, like, if you had some 3D models and you want some like lighting, you really want to click over to this one, which is rendered. This one takes longer to process, but it basically shows you what it's going to look like when it's rendered. So let's go back to look dev. Oh, the last one, which I believe it's this button, X-ray. Yeah, so let's add an object so that you can see this effect in action a bit better. But if you turn on X-ray, nothing happens. Okay. It must not work in look dev, but if you're in like wireframe, maybe solid mode, yeah. When you're in solid mode, you can turn on X-ray. And the hotkey for this, I believe, is Alt-Z. So Alt-Z puts you in X-ray mode. And the hotkey for all of these is just Z. So you hit Z, and you have this little pie chart with solid, wireframe, look dev rendered. So let's go over to look dev. Let's delete these monkeys. Okay. 0 back to the camera view. Oh, I keep thinking of things. One little viewport navigation trick. Let's say you're over here and you're like, I want to focus on this object. Like I can select the object, but how do I focus on it? Because it's way over there and I kind of, do I scroll over to it? A quick way to do that is you press the period key. Hold on, not period. Delete? What is it? It's the period numpad key. So yeah, it's the period numpad key. So if you press that, it centers on whatever object you have selected. So let's select the camera, period numpad, and it kind of centers us on it. So that's very helpful at times if you want to center. Okay. Back to the camera view. Now that we've theoretically got our scene set up, we want to render it, right? So let's just see what the render is going to look like. Let's go up to render image. It rendered super quickly. It rendered in actually 0.53 seconds, so about half a second. And this is what the render is going to look like. And this is like a little separate window. So you just X out of that. I usually don't like when it puts a separate window. I like when it does it inside of Blender, so you can change that here. Display mode, new window, let's do image editor. And then when you click render image, it does it in the image editor. So now we're in the image editor, and if you want to get out of it, you just hit escape. And it takes us back to where we were. I like to use it like that. Maybe you like a separate window. Let's just leave it on that for now. And if you want to render your whole animation, you would click this, render animation. Let's not do that yet though, because there's this one thing, where is it going to render it? When you render an animation, it has to know where it's putting all these frames. So let's talk about that. Over here in your properties editor, you want to click on, which one do you want to click on? This one, output, okay. And it has the dimensions for the image you're outputting, right? 1920 by 1080 at 100% resolution. So this, you could do like 50% and then it's half as big. Let's do 100. This is the start frame, the end frame. This is the frames per second. You could change this to some of these presets, or you could do custom at the bottom. We're gonna leave it at 24. And this is the one you're looking for, output. So this is where it's going to output your animation. So if you click this little file button, you can tell it where to output it. Let's put it here, and let's say my animation, accept. So now it's going to output it there at that position, but what is it going to output it as? It's going to output it as a PNG sequence by default with alpha, right? RGBA, so with alpha. So let's not do that. Let's have it output it as a video. So to do that, you really want to do FFmpeg video. This is what I use at least. And now there's another drop down, encoding. This is how it encodes it. So the default settings aren't great for me. Here's the default settings I use. They're very simple. And this I can put it on YouTube and it seems to work all right. So the container, we want MPEG 4. For the codec, H.264 is fine. I think that's what YouTube likes. For the output quality, instead of medium quality, I messed around this for a while, and the one I like the best, I think looks good, is just constant bitrate. Maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe that makes the file too big. I'm not sure. It looks the best to me, because when you use even if you use like high quality, I still see little fuzziness and like weirdness, and a constant bitrate just seems to be super smooth. And finally down here we have the audio codec. So right now it says no audio, which means even if you have audio in Blender, which I'll show you how to do in a second, it won't save it. So you really want to change this to AAC or MP3. AAC is a bit more high quality though. And you can see it's at 100% volume with that bit rate and all that stuff. So that's good. But we don't have any audio in the file. So let's put some audio in. Let's add a new workspace, video editing, video editing. Now we're in the video editing sequencer. This is the only way I know how to add audio. So let's Shift A, add sound. Oops, where are we? Let's add some audio again from this animation, like audio master 2 or something. And there you go. Control middle drag to kind of scale this window so we can see the whole thing. So you can see our end frame is a little early for this audio clip, so you can just change the end frame here. Another way to do it would be to just place your cursor, click your cursor here. There we go. So we're right at the end frame, and we'll do playback, set end frame. There we go. So now it's the length of your audio clip. And you can't hear the audio clip. You can hear it if you hit play. But maybe you want to scrub, which is helpful for lip sync. You know, you want to scrub through it. So you want to go down here to playback, audio scrubbing. And you can do that here too, right? Playback, audio scrubbing. And now it's on. And now when we click around, you can scrub through the audio. Another one you want to click on, I think it should be on by default, but you should go click it anyway. Playback, no sync, AV sync. That stands for audio video sync. And it means that it's going to make sure that the video doesn't lag behind from the audio when you're playing it. It makes sure that it just drops frames so that they stay in sync. And it, you know, just when you're previewing it, it drops the frames. When you render it, it's going to be super smooth and good. If you're working with like the raw audio clips and of like line readings and you want to bring them in, you could do that. So let's like, what is this? Let's delete this. Axe delete.
Over here. You must see this incredible.
So this is just the dialogue from one of the characters from my animation. So you could, you know, let's actually talk about this briefly.
Over here.
Let's say we want to cut it there. The way you can cut this audio clip and move around the chunks is you want to hit K for cut. That's not how cut is spelled. I don't know why it's K, but there you go. It cut it. And now we can move this one little bit around. A G to grab. So let's move that over here. There. And now you can see.
Miriam, over here.
It's a big old silence. So that could be helpful if you're still kind of structuring your animation. You haven't done like the final audio, or maybe you don't want to do any sort of like final mastering and you just want raw audio. This is a great way that lets you do it inside of Blender. Okay, so I think we're about there, right? We're telling it where to output it. We're telling it what to output it as. And now we could go over here and hit render animation. And if we do that, it's going to do this. It's going to go one frame at a time. It's going pretty quick. We're on frame 8, 9, 10. And you can like zoom out in here. It's a little laggy because it's trying to render, but if you want to like, you know, middle mouse wheel zoom out and get a view of what's going on. Let's pause it there because I don't want to wait for 250 frames. So you hit escape to cancel out, right? And then you can X out of this. And now it will have exported a video file in the place you want it to export it. So that's great. And then you could upload that to YouTube. So I'm sure I missed a couple things. If you're having any trouble, there's a huge Blender community, you know, ready to help. So just hit up Google and try and Google whatever Blender issue you're having. You know, Blender keyframe. Google like Blender keyframe duplicate, I don't know, that kind of thing. Hopefully I got the basics of how to do it. And now, to add some extra tips on top, I'm going to dive into one of my actual Blender animation files, and we're just going to take a look around. So let's do that right now. Here we are. This is memory. This is the animation I did. I think I called the animation, "Are You Going to Try for a Different Life?" I used the audio from the Cats trailer, and I made this weird Cats animation. But I did a couple like weird video tricks in this, some zooming and stuff that I think it'd be a fun file to look at. So we're in the file, and we can, look around. All the backgrounds are gray right now. Let's make sure we can see them. So I'm going to hit Z and switch to either look dev or rendered. I'm just going to do rendered. Maybe look dev, actually. That kind of took a second. Yeah, look dev looks fine. It's a bit laggy. I think that's because I'm screen capturing. Let's go to the camera view and let's start talking about what's going on here. It's a lot of, it's complicated, right? It kind of adds up. Well, I'm going to try and explain all the different parts. So, what are these big circles? These are empties. They don't show up when you render. They don't have to look like this. I just like the shape. If you want to add an empty, and what they do is they can move objects around. So you can see stuff are parented to this empty. So to add your own empty, you just do Shift-A, empty, here. And I just added a circle. And you can see, here's a little circle, right? Now, I have a circle for every shot in the animation. And basically what the circles do is I parent everything in that shot. So the, let me hit numpad period to zoom over here so it centers the view on this. So you can see this is my grease pencil object that is the character. This is my background for the shot, and they're both parented to this big old circle. And the big old circle, this is kind of complicated. It's just an empty, but it's parented way over here to this empty. Hold on, let me try and select it. Here. I don't name anything, but my whole idea, what I'm thinking of, this is the wrong empty. My bad, everybody. Where's the empty I want? There it is. Oh my goodness. I've made a mess of this. So I normally have this in the first shot, so it's easier to find. There's an itty bitty empty here. And what this one does is all of these circles are parented to this empty. Oh my goodness. I haven't shown you how to parent stuff. It's very easy to do, but let's say we want to make sure this object is parented to this empty. And a parent just means when you move the object or rotate it or scale it, the other objects follow it exactly. So let's select the grease pencil object, hold shift and select the empty so that you selected the object that you want to be the child first, and you selected the object you want to be the parent last. So right, 1, 2. Control P to make a parent. Control P, parent. Set parent to object. I just do the top one. These are the ones do some stuff. So yeah, I have all these empties, an empty for each shot, and all the objects in the shot are parented to the empty, and then all the empties are parented to this little empty, and this one controls all the shots. So this is all very complicated. The reason I do it like this is I just want the camera to sit in one spot, and I want the shots to move in front of the camera like this as the animation plays. So let's zoom out and watch that happening. Right. Zoom in, see that better. And it just pans from shot to shot. And the way I'm making the pan is I'm literally just, I think I go to the front view, I hit G, X to move on the X-axis, and I hit Control, and Control snaps it to a grid so I can really make sure they move in an exact increment every time, so you know, I'm not trying to eyeball it, although you could. And the reason when I move it through space, it isn't just sliding really slowly between each shot, it jumps, right? The way you make it jump is, let's go up here and let's pull out the graph editor again. And there you go. You can see what's happening. It's like a staircase. And the way you do that is, again, you hit T to change, A to select all the points, T to change the interpolation, and I'm changing it to constant. So by default, it's at linear, and it's going to look like this mess, where the shots just kind of fly in front of you. So we want to make sure T constant. And now they'll only change, you know, when you've set the keyframe. Otherwise, it just sits on the previous keyframe. I don't want to necessarily imply that this is the way you have to do it, that you need all these empties and stuff. This is just how I like to do it. There's any number of ways you could structure your animation. Maybe you don't have a bunch of grease pencil objects. Maybe you just have one grease pencil object and it has a bunch of layers and a bunch of materials. Let's look at this one. How many layers does this have? So this has overlay, mouth, mouth fill, lines, and colors. So you basically need 2 layers for every shape that you want to have. So you can see, because you want a layer for the lines and a layer for the fills. So this is the mouth lines. These are the mouth fills. You can see if I zoom in, it's changing the lines here and the fills here. And then we've got the primary lines for the rest of the shape, and then the fills for that. And they don't have to have these names. These are just the names I decided to give it. And the overlay, you can actually see is turned off. I muted it. I didn't end up using it in this animation because I was having trouble with it. My idea was, let me turn it on. All it was is it's like a gradient effect where from the top it's a lighter blue and then it fades out. And the way I did that is the overlay layer contains one shape on it, and that one shape, let's go into edit mode so we can see it. Here you go, look, there it is. It's a big square, and it's a big square that takes up the whole character. And the square has a specific material. Here's all the materials for this one. It's got coat 01, coat dark, that's the shaded part of the coat lines, blah, blah, blah. Scroll all the way down, overlay. So overlay is a material I put in Blender, and instead of it being this, which is solid, that's just a solid color, I switched it to texture. And this lets you import an actual image texture. And my image texture is just, you know, a gradient that I made in some art program somewhere. I had to move it around a lot. I remember that. Like you can see the Y is 2.1 and the scale is 1.4. That was just me, you know, you draw in the square and it tries to map the texture onto it, and it can sometimes be a bit of a mess. You have to tweak the settings to get it in the spot you want it. Let's talk about the, you can see it, this rim light effect. So this is something that's built into Blender, which I use maybe a little too much because it's a bit tacky at times, but you know, it's a very quick and easy way to get some lighting. Let's talk about this. So this is a grease pencil effect. That's this tab over here. It looks like a magic wand. These are visual effects. Right now, I've added one effect, rim. And you can see here's the rim light effect here. So how does this work? All it's doing is it's taking the kind of alpha of your entire grease pencil object and it's moving it. In fact, I've moved it personally with the offset here. You can see it's like a shadow of the object that has been moved in this direction. It's not actually a shadow because these colors here are the materials by default. It's a rim light. It's adding this color, this dark yellow color, and I've set it to add. You could set it to multiply and it would be like a shadow, or overlay, and that would like do overlay. If you used an art program, you know these kind of effects, but let's have it be add. And if you wanted to make the effect more intense, you would just make this color brighter. Whoa, yeah, that's too intense. So I like it nice and dark, so it's a very gentle rim light. And I've also blurred it, which is a little overkill. I'm not sure I'd do that again, but if you turn this blur down to like 0, you can see this is how it looks by default. It's very sharp. I kind of like this look better, but oh, and if you're blurring it, you want to make sure you turn the samples up as well. Because if the samples are like, you know, if you've got some blur but the samples are at 0, it's not going to blur it either. And samples are just how detailed the blur is. And there are other effects you could add. Blur, right? That blurs the whole grease pencil. That's helpful if you want like a character to look out of focus. You could blur them. Oh, lock focal plane? Oh, whoa! Blur using focal plane distances factor to simulate depth of field effect. I didn't know about this. That's really cool. What I normally did was I just keyframed the samples, and you can keyframe any of these sliders in Blender just by hovering over and clicking I, and that makes a keyframe. Then you go a couple frames later, you change it, and you hit I again, and then it will animate that factor, which is really cool. But apparently you don't necessarily need to do that if you click lock focal plane. My only issue with that is then you would have to have your grease pencil drawings actually far away from, like physically on the y-axis far away from the camera for that to work. I don't know. You can mess around with that. Let's keep looking through the scene for other stuff. And again, this is just a background image. Oh, the G. Let me talk about the G. The G is just a grease pencil object that has one layer, and most importantly, it has all the materials. It has the palette of this character, Grisabella, from this animation. This is a little trick I do when I want to animate the next shot, but I don't want to make it. I want to make a new grease pencil object, but I want it to have all the properties, all the materials, the kind of palette of all the other Grisabellas. So I just have this little copy, and I can do Shift D to duplicate it, and then I would parent it to this object. Just parent it, right? And then I would go into draw mode. I would change the layers, and I would start animating for this shot, because I like to have a grease pencil object per shot. That's just how I'd like to have it set up. Let's delete that. So you can see in this shot that it's kind of complicated. I've got a plane. This is an image plane out here. And when you import an image plane into Blender, I mean a background in Blender, and you want it to be transparent, by default it's going to look like this, right? That's a pain. But maybe you want it to be transparent. So you really want to go over to the materials for your image, and you want to change the blend mode to alpha blend in some situations. So this will cause issues if you want to put this on top of a grease pencil. Look, see, even though this object's in front of the grease pencil, it's still rendering behind it. And that's just because alpha blend, which is basically a soft edge, just doesn't seem to work in this version of Blender over grease pencil. So you really want to change this to alpha clip, and that will make it appear in front of it. And that just means it's not a soft edge, it's clipped. And you can change how much it's clipped here. So maybe we want it really clipped. I think that's something they're going to change in 2.81. I think they might have already fixed it, where you can have this be like alpha blend or something. I'm just doing this tutorial for 2.8 because that's what's out right now, and that's what I've been using. So in 2.8, if you want a transparent image to appear on top of a grease pencil, you need to change it to alpha clip. If it doesn't need to, then it can just be alpha blend, and that'll work fine. So let's look at some of these other layers. So you can see there's the grease pencil object, right, which has the character's animation. And behind the character, we've got another plane, and this is just the background back here. And you can see I didn't even paint all of it because I knew it'd be hidden by these characters. And all these objects are parented to this one, so you can move the whole shot around. Let's take a look at this shot, I guess. I don't think this has any grease pencil in it. No, it doesn't. It's really just a bunch of planes that I've imported. So I have one for the eyes. I have one for this whole character here. I have this one back here. And I think I make the shot pan. Yeah, I do. You can see the camera object is actually panning through space. And you can't see the camera's keyframes because this is the keyframe editor, and we're set to grease pencil mode. So it's only showing grease pencil objects keyframes. So you can actually change this to a dope sheet. That's what it's called. I don't know why you change it. I kind of know why. It's like an old animation term, but they could just call it that. So you change the dope sheet, and now you can see all the keyframes for this camera. Right, and maybe you want to move or delete some of these keyframes. You could do that. I'm just gonna switch this back to grease pencil. Let's take a look at another shot. This one, yay! Yeah, so this was pretty complicated. I have a big plane, which is just an image of the ground that I've kind of stretched out. I've got another plane in the back, which is the background. I've got these characters, which are actually grease pencil objects that I've used the blur filter on. Right, so they're all blurry. This one even has a rim light. You can see that there. You can turn it off over here. It's got a rim light and blur. And these characters are all parented to this big old empty. Right, all the objects are parented to this big empty. And I've keyframed the empty so that it slowly slides through space. All right, like that. And when I don't want the camera to see this giant setup, I just move it down, right, like that. It's pretty silly. I just don't want it, you know, in the view of the camera. So, oh, you can see these squiggly blue lines here. Let's take a look at those. They're there. These are the storyboards. So let's just focus on the storyboards for a second. So if you don't want to see an object in Blender, you hit H to hide it. It's still technically there, and when you render, it'll show up, but you can hide it from your view temporarily so you don't have to look at it. And if you want it to come back, you do Alt-H, and that will bring every hidden object back. So let's select the storyboards, and let's do Shift-H. That hides everything but the selected object. So now you can actually see my original storyboards for this animation. I even have notes: fog, rooftops, Grizz, because it's Grizzabella. This is because the shot tracks. Right, these were very rough storyboards. Yeah, and you can actually see up here, this is like a summary of all the objects in the scene. That a middle mouse dragging to pan around. You can see everything is hidden except for the camera and this stroke. So if you want to unhide everything, you do Alt-H, and that brings everything back. But yeah, I have the storyboards as their own grease pencil object, and then I just add the other cleanup grease pencil objects on top of it. This one is a kind of complex, like parallaxing shot, and the way I did that is I'm just moving the camera up, and then the physical 3D objects are actually parallaxed in space. So you could do this another way. You could have these much closer together and just hand animate them moving at different rates. That might actually be easier. But in this case, I just decided to physically place them further apart, and then naturally, because Blender sees in perspective, they parallax. In fact, I could even move the camera in different ways, and you would still get that parallax effect. I think that's pretty cool. But in this shot, I only move it up. I also have this fog. I am not going to talk about the fog because it was a huge pain, and it didn't really work the way I wanted it to, so we're just going to ignore it. If you want to do fog, you gotta figure it out yourself. I don't know. I think we're about done looking through this animation. Yeah. You can see how most of these are done. It's just grease pencil characters, the background, the camera pans a little, all that stuff. Oh, this one, that background's way further away, so I could get that parallax effect for free. Let's take a peek at my other animation that I've done in Blender. Here we are. Okay, we're inside of my witch animation. So let's first Z rendered. Right? So now we can see the rendered view, and we can see all the textures. So here's the first shot, and you can already see the kind of layering that's happening here. So you have this big old plane, which is the TV. The fact that this is all black is just how the background looks, right? I didn't bother drawing what's behind the TV. And the reason it's a separate object is because I want that little itty bitty part of it to appear in front of this character here, in front of Miriam. And the only way to do that, if you'll remember, is it needs to be off a clip. So even though this is a little blurry, it's a little out of focus, the actual edge of it is quite hard. And then behind her, I have this plane, right? And then behind that, I have another plane. And this isn't for parallax, this is just like this because this character pops in. And I need here to appear in front of this background, but behind this one. So I've just physically moved the object through space. And again, on this background, I used alpha clip, not alpha blend. So that it would, you know. And this is the same basic setup as the cat's animation. Everything is parented to a big empty. I mean, each shot is parented to an empty, and all the empties are parented to this kind of master empty, which moves the whole setup. And then up here we have J for Joanna and M for Miriam, and these are just, they basically just the palette. This one was pretty complicated. I kind of didn't want to show this because it's supposed to be like a little Easter egg, but it doesn't really matter, and it was kind of complicated to do, so I better show it. At the front of the shot, we have the grease pencil for this character, and then we've got this kind of out of focus background, which again is alpha clipped, even though it's supposed to be kind of blurry, it's clipped here. So we can see this character back here. And this character has the blur effect on, and I actually animate the blur effect so it gets less. You can see that here in the samples for the blur effect, it gets less. And then behind all this, we have another background here, right? And that's just this little itty bitty part that you can see, and I put a hole in the television. What's going on there? That's right, folks. Behind that is this plane, where I am playing a very blurry video from a film that I enjoy. You probably haven't heard, it's a little indie flick. But the way I'm doing that is when I did import images as planes, you could also just import video as a plane, and that'll work, and it'll bring it in as a video. Now you need to change the start point of the video, right? When I imported this, the start frame was frame 1, which is not what I wanted, but I wanted to start at the beginning of this shot. So I changed the start frame. This might have been minimized, so I import. So you want to maximize this one here. Maximize this, and you change the start frame to wherever you want this video to start playing. You need to change how many frames it shows from the video. I just kind of set that to the length of this shot. Auto refresh, I think that's on by default. And yeah, it plays this little video. Most of the shots in this are very simple. It's just grease pencil characters and then one background that's not far away or anything because the shot doesn't move. And the shot looks blurry because that's how I saved the image. I blurred my whole background in my art program before I saved it. Oh, here's something I'll talk about really quick. This material, which I believe is called... This material here, Miriam Specs, which is for her spectacles, but I also used it for the bottle here, is transparent. And the way to make it a transparent fill or a transparent line is when you're setting the material color, you can come down here and change the alpha as well. So this is an alpha of 0.3, so it's actually transparent. That's about it. Yeah, that's it for like interesting shots. So I think that's everything. So thank you very much for watching. I hope this was at all helpful and it wasn't just me rambling. If y'all want to see another video going into more detail, I'll probably do another one of these when Blender 2.81 comes out and maybe talk about the new features in that. But until then, I'll see you all later. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.